Penguin Random House Audio presents The Conversation: How Seeking and Speaking the Truth About Racism Can Radically Transform Individuals and Organizations, by Robert Livingston. Read for you by Desmond Manny. Note to listeners: this audiobook includes a downloadable PDF, which contains charts and illustrations from the book that can be used interactively with this program. Introduction. The lecture hall on the campus of Harvard University was abuzz with the amped-up energy of students arriving for their first day of class. These students, however, were far from undergraduates. They were a motley crew of corporate leaders, police chiefs, university presidents, military brass, NGO directors, elected officials, social activists, and entrepreneurs. As they filed into their seats, I couldn't help but notice Ted, in part due to his towering stature and shiny bald head, and in part due to his demeanor. He seemed slightly uneasy and withdrawn. Was his discomfort the result of being surrounded by dozens of strangers from all over the world, or was it related to the topic of the course? I soon discovered that it was the latter. Unlike the other attendees, Ted had no desire whatsoever to attend my 6-day executive education course on strategies for building diversity, equity, and inclusion. No way. In fact, he had intended to enroll in a course on authentic leadership that was being offered during the same week. A registration error had landed him in my course instead. A self-described polite Midwesterner, Ted went along with the mix-up, despite a healthy dose of disappointment and trepidation. "Oh boy, this is going to be the longest week of my life," he later admitted thinking as he sat in the lecture hall, preparing himself for what he assumed would be the "let's beat up on the white guy" class. Ted served as mayor of a small but affluent city located about 20 miles from a Midwestern metropolis. He had grown up on a farm and in many ways fit the country stereotype. He is a strapping man, 6'5" with a ruddy complexion and a shaved head, the kind of guy who prefers jeans over slacks. Ted began his career as a firefighter in his early 20s and, over time, rose to become the fire chief before transitioning to his role as the city's chief administrator. He had been surrounded by whiteness his whole life, both in his hometown and in the nearby city that he ran. Ted didn't say much that first morning. He sat quietly, intensely absorbing the course material and commentaries from his classmates. It was his first time learning about the dynamics of structural racism and the numerous disparities that it creates. His face expressed a combination of curiosity and skepticism. When he finally raised his hand during a discussion on implicit bias, his first comment was, "So I guess this means I'm a bigot." "I'm not sure, Ted," I replied, "but that's not a term that I'd use. We all have some type of bias. What differentiates us is what we choose to do about it. We may not be able to control our thoughts, but we have the power to determine our actions." Throughout that week, Ted's assumptions about the world were challenged. The course stretched his comfort zone. After all, he was seeing more racial diversity in one classroom than in his entire hometown. As the days and hours went on, I saw Ted's discomfort dissipate. The 50-some participants were together almost every waking hour. Breakfast, classes, excursions, lunch, dinner, cocktails. More cocktails. New friendships were formed. For many of the students, the course was as much about building relationships with one another and with me as it was about honing skills and expertise. Earlier in my career, I was taken by surprise when people who attended my courses seemed intent on getting to know me personally, asking about my childhood hobbies or my favorite foods. Why would they care? What I've learned over the years, however, is that those hours of small talk dramatically increase the likelihood that people will hear me during the hours of formal presentations. Relationships provide a portal for facts to enter and learning to occur. They create what Brian Stevenson, founder and executive director of the Equal Justice Initiative, an author of Just Mercy, refers to as proximity. People need to get proximate to one another for change to occur. My hope is that the conversation will bring people together to talk honestly about race, with the goal of creating profound and sustainable social change. What differentiates the conversation from many other books on race is that it is neither a thesis nor a testimonial. My primary aim is not to bolster support for a scholarly hypothesis or assumption, and it is not to give an autobiographical account of my personal experiences with racism. You can find several superb and inspirational examples of these respective genres, including Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram Kendi and Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, just to name a couple. Instead, the conversation is a tool, a roadmap and compass for our shared journey toward a more racially just and equitable destination. Its goal is to help us collectively make progress toward solving the perennial problem of racism, particularly as it relates to anti-Black racism in the United States. It's an ambitious endeavor, to say the least, but I am an optimist. However, it's not blind optimism. Here's a little-known truth. Racial equity is an achievable goal. That's not just my opinion. Logic, data, and scientific evidence all speak to the solvability of racism. In addition to being achievable, racial equity is desirable. The overwhelming majority of Americans from all walks of life agree that for the country to reach its full potential, all individuals, regardless of race, must have equal rights, the same economic opportunities, and the same access to quality education. 96% of Blacks agree. 93% of Hispanics agree. And 93% of whites agree. Moreover, at least 90% of respondents from each of the groups believe that establishing greater equity across people of all backgrounds is critical for moving the country forward. If racial equity is both desirable and attainable, then the key questions are, why hasn't it happened yet? And how can we make it happen now? The conversation aspires to provide answers to these very important questions. Like other challenges facing individuals, for example, weight loss, and the world, for example, climate change, the problem of racism can be solved, in theory, with the right information, investment, strategy, and implementation. This endeavor has been my life's work for over 20 years. As an academic, I have published research in leading scientific journals on the psychological and organizational implications of racism and sexism. As a practitioner, I have put this knowledge to work serving as a diversity consultant to scores of Fortune 500 companies, police departments, hospitals, universities, federal agencies, and nonprofit organizations. To give but one example of the work I have done, Brian Chesky, CEO of Airbnb, identified me in Time magazine as a member of the team assembled to combat discrimination on the company's online platform, designing an anti-bias training module that was rolled out to millions of users. Over my years working with this broad range of clients, I have developed and implemented a set of practices that turns difficult conversations about race into productive outcomes. Because my approach is solution-oriented, and it works, many have encouraged me to distill it into a book. The conversation is the fruit of that effort. Here is a peek into my approach. I do not rely too heavily on carrots or sticks. Although external incentives can be useful when used sparingly and strategically, I have learned that they are of limited effectiveness if the goal is to produce long-term change. Established research has shown that putting too much emphasis on incentives can undermine intrinsic commitment and motivation. For example, organizational psychologist Frederick Hertzberg has argued that negative incentives, or what he refers to as kidda, kick in the ass, can produce movement in the workplace. People will often do what you want if you wave around a stick. However, kidda will not lead to a lasting commitment to adopting new behaviors. and will often result in a
Sample complete. Ready to continue?